We're live, spontaneous, impromptu live session with Erica Rivera, our career coach. What will we say? You're like my career coach, partner in crime, or like when you have somebody that you like. It's like an adjunct professor or something like, or when you like
Yeah.
hire someone out to do like you're my career coach. They're hired out to be on here, but those are just my random thoughts today. But everybody who's joining us, either hopefully live or watching the recording, Erica and I were chatting about resumes and job searches, and we had a conversation a week or so ago that ran long. We wanted to keep the conversation going, and today we just decided why not go live. It's a great way for folks to engage with us and give us their questions live and in the moment. So hopefully some of you guys will engage with us here. I know Erica has collected some common questions from folks that she coaches. I can certainly bring up common questions that I get to as a recruiter. But thanks, Erica, for being willing to go live so spontaneously.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sloan. This is great. And to your point, I love the fact that we're able to have this conversation just because it's going to help people. There's a lot of questions to your point that come up, especially navigating the job search. And so I think I know I have some questions that we can definitely chat about that I would love to present to you, and maybe just we open up a dialogue and I can bring in kind of my previous recruiting experience, just giving some of that perspective as well.
If you talk about the fact that you were a recruiter at Google before, you're going to get bombarded with messages. You're going to want to know the inside scoop, especially my network of tech folks. They're going to want to hit you up for sure. But kick us off with one of the questions you have. I have a couple.
Absolutely.
Kind of on the back burner. We'll start with one of yours.
Absolutely. Okay. So one of the questions that I have here is, what are some of red flags that might cause a recruiter to skip over an application?
Ooh, like red flags, like the where you're just gonna toss it.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have any that are super immediate. Other than like if I'm recruiting for a role and I immediately open a resume and immediately can see that that person is not in the right field, if that makes sense. Like I definitely have posted a job for a software engineer and somebody applies with zero software engineering experience and the role is like a senior level role, not an entry level role. So that might be something that I can tell right off the bat pretty quickly they're not a fit. I'm actually going to have a conversation with a VP of engineering, Mary Moore Simmons, on Friday, and she is going to walk us through her thought process when she reads resumes. We do it very similarly, where one of the first things we look at is titles, and you just can kind of take your eye title by title. So you want to make sure that your experience or that your title reflects your experience. Your company isn't going to probably care if you change your title a little bit. I'm not saying lie. Don't give yourself a leadership title if you don't have a leadership role. But sometimes companies do a terrible job of titling jobs. And it's like, this is not actually what I do at all. My job is more aligned with this kind of title. So make sure your titles look appropriate. But that's one thing that I immediately look for and could be a red flag if they don't have any of the prerequisite experience. If it's an on-site job, the location doesn't seem to match. That could be something that could cause me to immediately throw it out. Sometimes I'll get applicants who live in a different country for a role that's on-site in the United States or can only hire U.S. residents. That just is an immediate throw out. That's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head that would be an immediate pass.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I would agree with you on that front because, just having looked at and reviewed resumes myself, one of the things I think location has definitely been a barrier in the sense of like, if I have to hire in a specific location, well, I'm going to prioritize those people that are in that location. I do think it does help, and correct me if you think differently, because I would love to hear your thoughts, but sometimes people are in the process of like relocating, for example. And that's a tough, situation. So do you think it helps to put relocating to, X location on the resume when you're looking at it? Does that help you, like in your review? I know me personally, when I've reviewed applicants, that was helpful to know. But sometimes, depending on the need of the role, like if it was something we need to hire immediately, then I may consider people that were more local just because of knowing the needs. So what are your thoughts around that actually?
I have a lot of thoughts. I think
it's a loaded question, right?
Because I'm thinking, putting myself in the shoes of a candidate, if I'm trying to be strategic, I might go ahead and list the location that I'm planning. If the relocation is firm, I have a house or a place to live, I am moving to this destination. Like when I finished grad school, I was relocating to Nashville, job or no job. And so I put on my resume Nashville, Tennessee, because that's where I was moving. So if I'm thinking of a candidate being strategic, if you're in that kind of situation, I would just go ahead and list the city and state that you're relocating to. If you are not relocating unless you get a job, then maybe you do put a tagline at the top that's like open to relocation to insert city name. And that might be helpful. I think it also matters if you do require relocation assistance. Are you open to paying for your own relocation? Because typically, I just don't see a lot of companies providing relocation unless it's a super, super, high level C-suite VP type role. So yes, I think it just depends on your relocation situation. Is it just something where you're like, if I got a job in New York, I'd move to New York? Or is it, I am moving here no matter what? I think that's listed out.
1,000%. Yeah, I think spot on. I would agree with that as well, just because everybody's situation is different. And it is a loaded question because depending on the circumstance, it's going to determine, how you approach that scenario. And then to your point, a good call out is that right now, and I think even just like generally speaking, there are more companies that are going to prioritize people that are local, just because, relocation is a cost and an expense that the company has to take on. And so knowing that, or knowing companies that are maybe more willing to relocate, for example, so kind of doing some of that homework is going to be helpful just from the standpoint of like, if you are in that situation actively, trying to relocate for a role. So I appreciate your insights there. And then I have a couple other questions.
Okay.
People, of course, want the tea. And so I hope I have it. Interviews. Yeah, thinking about interviews here, from what you have seen, when we think about multiple interviews, so this person asks why you think that companies have people go through more than, well, in this case, they put 2 interviews. I mean, I know it's going to look different for every role,
industry is different.
Thoughts? Yeah. What are your thoughts about interview process and maybe when you see lengthier processes?
Yeah. Another loaded question, Erica.
Yeah. I'm coming with all the difficult ones today.
I can see both sides of it. I think multiple interviews can definitely be justified and can definitely be needed. And then I also think there are some interview processes that are adding steps for the sake of adding steps. And they could definitely be consolidated. As a staffing partner, I work for a staffing agency where we partner with multiple outside organizations and help them with their recruiting and hiring process. And we give that feedback if we think, there are some extra steps here that could be consolidated and that could, speed up your timeline and prevent you from losing out on candidates due to timeline. Because I've seen that where a client's process takes so long that we're losing candidates to other opportunities. It's like, this was your favorite candidate, but you didn't move quick enough and now they're gone. So I definitely think that there's a little bit of both. I've seen great processes where they have 2 to 3 steps, and every single one of those steps is a great touch point with the organization, and candidates come back to me with that feedback of like, I enjoyed every conversation and every conversation covered something a little bit different. So why a company structures it the way they do, it depends on the company. It also depends on the role. I can speak from a tech perspective. They usually have multiple steps because there's usually an interview to vet cultural and organizational fit and fit for the role at a high level. And then there's usually a deeper dive into their technical fit. Can they do the software development needed in this role? So that would be why there'd be 2 steps there. Other generalizations about why there might be 2 steps. Usually there's like an initial screening with one person, whether that's the hiring manager, the recruiter, the HR representative. That's a very high level phone screen or a Zoom call just to make sure you're a strong enough candidate. And then the second round is usually like a deeper dive with the team. Like you're going to get to meet multiple people, or maybe you're going to get to go on site and give a presentation. So I think it makes sense when there's multiple steps. But I also have some clients that do one and done. So like we can get everything done in one conversation, one meeting. And I love that too. So I think it just depends on the company. But I know it can be frustrating from the candidate point of view. Not every process is going to be clean and tidy, unfortunately.
Yep. No, this is a great call out. And I think to your point, depending on role, depending on industry, depending on, you know, what they're essentially vetting for, there's just different factors. And some companies, to your point, just have the opportunity to maybe take a look at their hiring process and, you know, eliminate some of those steps, right? That they don't necessarily
and
need.
we've had clients take our advice on that, and
Yeah.
they've seen improvements of like, wow, that saved us a lot of time and, you know, eliminated redundancy. So it's definitely something that can be needed. And the other thing I would say to candidates listening is view each opportunity another chance to market yourself, to shine in front of maybe a new person on the team, but also view it as another opportunity for you to vet out this organization's fit with what you're looking for too, because there's only so much we can do before actually working somewhere to make sure it's the right fit for us. But if you get multiple interview opportunities, you're just getting another opportunity to ask new questions or ask the same questions of someone else, get someone else's perspective of what it's like to work there. And I think each one of those steps is going to give you further clarity on whether this is a place you want to work or if this is a job you want. So I would, you know, if you're looking to try to spin it in a positive light, which I have to force myself to do because I'm kind of a pessimist, that's how I would try to spin it.
Absolutely. No, that's great perspective. So I do appreciate you bringing that to the table.
Yeah.
I do have a couple other questions. So I'm going to switch it to resume.
Okay.
So I'm going to kind of be a little bit all over. I'm like looking at a long list of questions, but one of the questions that came up on resume specifically is when it comes to listing skills on your resume, do you recommend listing like tools and technologies that they're using as part of skills?
Yeah, my answer is going to be biased towards tech because I have spent the bulk of my years in recruiting software engineers, folks who are going to be hands-on in software development. So of course, they need to list the tools and technologies they've used. So this might look like JavaScript, React, Node, AWS. It's listing the tech stack that they've been in. Now, if you are outside of software development, do I think you need to list Microsoft's Office suite? I don't know. What do you think about that, Erica? I mean, I feel like I've been a little, I guess, I just don't think it's necessary. I don't personally have it listed on my resume. Because I think at this day and age, it's assumed that if you've worked in an office setting, you can use Microsoft Office Suite and you can do other things tech-wise that would be needed for if it's a non-technical role. I think it's assumed that if you've been in an office, you can use the technologies that a non-technical role would require, like Outlook, Word, PowerPoint. Can't even think of any others. You know, just an ATS, a CRM. Those are kinds of things that are standard practice these days. So if you've been in a role that's similar, I think it's just an assumption. Save the real estate on your resume for something else. Because I did want to talk today about, you know, resume length, because this is something that I'm changing. I'm going back and forth on my opinion on resume length. What do you usually advise people to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me give you kind of first on the skill side real quick. I was like, I want to just address that real fast. So I typically tell people utilize the job description when they're making that decision, because sometimes I will say that while I do very much agree on the aspect of like it's assumed, you know, a lot of the Microsoft or using Google Suite, things like that, like those are things you should, you know, it's kind of like
you should know
this stuff, right? Sometimes they do call it out, you know, in a job description where they're asking specifically, you know, for those tools, or they'll say, you know, must know Excel or things. In that case, then I think, yes, it very much, I would absolutely call it out just to make sure that you're kind of like checking that box more so than anything, because sometimes I think you don't know on the receiving end, that might be what they're looking for. You know, they might be looking to see if you call that out. So I think that is where I would maybe personally, you know, tweak it in that situation. And, you know, we should be tailoring our resumes, I believe, to the job, right, that we're applying for. So that's just my 2 cents there. But length, all right. Yes, this one I love. This one I love. So I am very much of the mindset of, I definitely hear the 1 page versus the 2 page. This is like a topic that I've
changed my mind a little bit on it, honestly.
Yeah, I've gotten into some, like, if I'm being very honest, some heated discussions, because I'm very passionate about where I stand on this. But what I will say is this, is that I think it really, from my point of view, it's what it makes sense for the person based on their role, their industry, because you need to understand what experience you need to showcase, and that could look different, depending on the role of the industry and also depending on where you're at in your career. So what I'll say is this, like, for example, if you're earlier in your career, you probably are not going to need a 2-page resume, say up to 5, 6, maybe 7 years, maybe 7 years kind of might be teetering the line of like, you might need that additional real estate. I will say that I do know from my experience in recruiting, and even you and I talked about this, that we're going to look at typically what's most relevant, and that's going to be current role. Maybe we'll go a roll back, maybe we'll go one back, but we really are going to spend a lot of time in what's going to be most relevant, which is current, is typically what's most current. But I do think that it is hard, especially when you have, say 10, 15 years of experience, to condense that and consolidate it into a page. And sometimes it might be you want to showcase specific, a couple of projects, and really emphasize some experience where it constitutes maybe having a little bit of a lengthier resume. But I personally don't think, more than 2 pages, I would not advise. And then just a caveat that, like, for example, government resumes is going to look different because you have to.
There's always exceptions to the rule,
right? There's exceptions. So that's kind of all of my thoughts, and I'm going to pass it over to you, and you tell me, talk to me. What do you think?
I'm changing my tune on this because I used to be the recruiter that was like, I don't care, send me whatever, I will look at it. The longer I'm in this industry, the more I've realized that we really are just looking closely at the first page. Like, I will skim the whole thing. Now, certainly I've seen some 6 to 10 page resumes, and it's just not necessary. There's no way I'm reading all of that, unfortunately. I wish it was the only resume I had to read that day, and I wish I could read the whole thing, but I can't. So 2 pages feels like a good maximum for most things. Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule, but 2 pages feels like a good maximum most of the time. But now I'm even leaning towards try to push yourself to that 1 page, or making sure that the most important things are on that first page, because that's the page people are really going to be looking closely at. And the more you have on there, the more the reader's attention is spread thin, and the more likely they might miss something. And I had to take this own advice for my own resume, because I was the grad student that had 2 pages. Maybe that's standard in higher ed, which is the field I used to be in, but I was including so many things on there, every internship and project I'd ever done. And it was hard for me to take some of that grad school stuff off there when I was doing my last job search, because I'm like, I feel like this stuff is so important to me, but it's now been so long ago, and it was when I was a student. So is it even relevant? And from a recruiter's perspective, I mean, you nailed it. It's that last job or 2 that you've had that we're really wanting to know. And hiring managers are really focused on that too. What are they doing in their current role that would transition to this one? If they didn't do it in their current role, how recently did they do it? And if it was more than 5 years ago, it starts to feel like it's maybe less relevant. And that's a hard pill to swallow for all of us. But it's just kind of the hiring managers market that we're in right now.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that perspective, and I do see exactly where you're coming from, because, like you reinforced and said, like, what's most relevant is going to be what is looked at. And so really nailing that and understanding that, you really have to make sure that you are being very intentional about what you are putting into your resume, because that's what they care about, is what is most relevant to them, which is like what is also most current and recent, because a lot of times they want to see that the experience you have is more recent, right? And I know that becomes tricky for people, and I guess, thoughts on this, I would love to hear, what your opinion is when it comes to, say, somebody who maybe is in a situation where they're trying to change careers, and maybe it's really hard, because then say they're trying to bring up some of that experience that maybe is a little bit further back in their career history, but that is what's, relevant maybe to the skill set that they're needing to kind of showcase. So what are your thoughts there when we think about how to present that? And I know, again, it's not a one size fits all, it's a loaded question, but any kind of initial, thoughts that you have there?
Yeah, it is so hard to pivot industries. And so you've already made this a good point, that looking at the job description and tailoring your resume to the job description is the best strategy no matter what, especially when you're trying to pivot, because you're going to be looking for those transferable skills of like, okay, I haven't been in this industry or this title before, but I've done some of these skills and I can make sure my bullet points match up with what they're looking for. And then if you do have a job or an internship or something from way back when that is now relevant to the industry or the role you're looking to pivot into, this is where I rely on my running resume. I keep a running resume with everything I've ever had on my resume at any point, things I've now deleted, just in case I'm applying to something that now feels relevant to that. I'm like, oh, that was a summer internship I did in college that's in this industry. Let's pop that back on my resume. So that's why it's good to keep up with everything somewhere in like a running document, so that you don't have to recraft it when it comes time to apply to jobs. Because if you're trying to pull it from memory, that's going to be almost impossible. But I think this, what we have said still holds true, is that your most recent job is going to be what the hiring manager wants to know the most about. So making sure you have a strong argument for how your current role or most recent role is going to allow you to pivot into this new space, I think is very important.
Yeah, that's great feedback, great advice, and I appreciate you giving your insight, because it's hard, right? Like
so
you said
earlier,
it's hard to pivot, and it's a tough pill to swallow when you think about the reality of kind of like the market right now. How
sometimes it feels like it's all you know.
Yeah,
and it's like, I hate that's the truth, that it is all who you know, but that's what I hear when people make pivots. It's good connections that allow them to get into a new industry.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, I think it stands true for a lot of things, like, just in general, a lot of times the people, the connections you have, just life in general is where you'll see, doors open. And to your point, when you're making a career pivot, very much so. So it's a good call out there. And I do have we were talking about resume and talking about showcasing experience. Another question came up that I wanted to ask you about. So I've been seeing a lot of, talk about showcasing your impact, showing metrics, numbers. And somebody brought into the conversation and asked the question of, well, what if I don't have metrics I can show? So how would you propose, going about that? Or how do you maybe look at resumes, and what do you look for when it comes to the actual content? And then I have a follow-up question after that.
Yeah. So I would push back on the person that says they don't have any metrics, because I've had that same thought before of like, numbers. I don't have any numbers. But if you think about what you do on a daily basis, most of it can be quantified, or if not most, some of it can be quantified. How much, like, what kind of projects are you working on? How many people are involved in those projects? How many people will use the results of your project? Are there data points you're looking at? How much data? Are there calls you're making on what's the frequency that you're making calls or leading events or hosting something? Scope, audience, frequency, those are all numbers that you could probably figure out for just about anything. But if you feel like you truly don't have metrics, I'm looking for outcomes and deliverables. It's the same when we talk about interviewing and you want to use the STAR method when you interview. You want to describe the situation, the task at hand, the action you took, and the result you got. It's kind of the same thing with your resume bullet points. You want to explain kind of very briefly, the reasoning behind why something was needed. And sometimes you don't have space to do that and it's not necessary, but you can explain the situation, the action you took, and the result. You want to really focus on the action and result piece in your bullet points. And so that's what I'm looking for. I think a lot of times people fall victim to the bullet points that are passive voice of like, served on a team that did XYZ, or collaborated with so-and-so on this, or worked for a healthcare company. And it's like, that doesn't tell me much about what did you do. You want to get as specific and granular as possible about what did you do, what actions did you take, and what results did you achieve. That's going to be the most impactful for a recruiter or any hiring manager to see.
Yeah, no, I love that you call that out. I have this like methodology that I tell people, what's your SIP, right? And so for me, that's like SSIP, which is like scope, scale, impact. And that's, typically that's going to be your value proposition, because that shows like, essentially, like you said, the situation, the scope, and then you think about the scale, at what scale, because to your point, it's different if you're, say, doing work that impacts you only versus impacting your team or impacting the entire organization of 100 people. Like that, those look different, and then essentially that impact that you had, which to your point goes back to looking at the STAR method. When you think about situation, task, action, and then the result, like you really need to explain that and show. It's like show versus tell. So I love how you brought that up, because you very much have eyes on resumes all the time that you're hiring, recruiting for. And so you saying that like from your own mouth, I think is impactful, because that really does resonate true. A lot of people talk about it. But I think it's really great that you did also call out that we all have metrics, even though we think we might not have metrics, we might not have
like, I don't have a job like that. That's not a metric, but it's like, if you look closely, there are metrics you can come up with to articulate what you do. And this isn't easy. This isn't something that you should be able to in 5 minutes. You would think it is. You're like, I should be able to describe my job in 5 to 10 bullet points in a few minutes. Like that should be easy, but it's actually not. Like it takes a while. It takes a lot of thinking to actually articulate, what do I actually do on a daily basis? What have I actually accomplished in this role? And I have this conversation with candidates a lot of pulling it out of them. I'm like, okay, you told me that you used React and Node to do full stack development on an application. What kind of application? What parts of the application were you developing? Who's using this application? What new things were you contributing to the application, and why were they needed? And we can really add a lot of detail to your resume when we add those things. So you do have to spend some time thinking on that. And if you're looking at your own resume and you want to say, what should I add to this? Ask yourself those questions. Like look at your bullet points and say, does this answer the question of what did I actually do and why did I do it? Just to give a plug, because this is on my brain, but I also recommend keeping a running Google Doc or something of what you do in your current job, so that when it does come time to work on your resume, you're not having to, come up with all of this from scratch. Start tracking your own metrics. If your company isn't one that is metric focused, track your own metrics. What are the goals that you're trying to hit, and what are the goals that you've met? What are the projects you've delivered on? Keep a running list of that. And that way you have this sort of written out ahead of time, so that when it comes time to come up with a resume, you can just plug and play those bullet points and maybe, sharpen them up a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's amazing advice. And I don't think enough people do that. So when they find themselves in the situation, it's time to update a resume, and we're like trying to rack our brain, trying to pull from, experience that we did, a couple years ago. But to your point, tracking along the way really helps with that. Yeah, and then even
I learned it the hard way of the layout. When you get laid off and you're like, oh crap, like I haven't touched my resume since I got this job 2 years ago. That's awesome.
Absolutely. I'm like, same thing, 1,000%. I learned the hard way, but I'm like, even thinking about it helps when you are maybe having to go in conversations where you're having performance reviews, or having to advocate for yourself, because if you're having to justify the work that you're doing, and you say, actually,
here's
hold
on, I do.
Let me look at my notes. And it helps. So I think it's really awesome you brought that up, and I appreciate you sharing that advice.
You also feel better about yourself. You're like, look at everything I've done. You're like, yes, go me. I'm doing
confidence
things.
Booster. Yes, 1,000%. I want to ask this question. I don't want to forget to ask, because this is something that came up a few times. So we were talking about metrics and how, we all have something that we can quantify and stuff like that. What about, is there overdoing it? Because there has been a question of like somebody brought to a conversation saying, well, I was told I have to have metrics in every single bullet point. And what are your thoughts there? Is that like, give me what you,
it feels arbitrary. I'm like, not every bullet point has to have data. I'm getting a flashback to the episode of Friends where Joey, I don't know if you're a Friends fan, but
yes,
Joey has to write that a letter of recommendation about Monica and Chandler, and he wants to sound smart, so he uses the thesaurus to change every single word in the letter, and then it makes no sense. So you do not want to overkill it here. You do not want to try to change every word to a data point instead. There's a balance, and I think you'll know what it is. I think once you get the bullet points down that you feel like accurately represent what you're passionate about and what you've accomplished in that role, you'll feel like it's right. I mean, when I look at my own resume, it's probably like a 50-50 split. 50% of the bullet points have, actionable data. The other ones are more so describing a project and the outcome or something I accomplished. So yeah, I think trying to include a number or a data point in every single bullet point would be a little bit overkill. I don't know that I've ever looked at a resume and thought somebody overdid it, but I can imagine that. I can picture what that might look like, and it might come across as like, this is made up, like this is fake, like there's no way all of this is true. So yeah, it's a balance. That's a good question though.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking. I was like, I didn't want to forget to ask that because I've seen it's been a few times, and I was like,
I don't think I've ever seen it. I feel like I've only ever seen resumes that strike the balance well, or they're lacking actual detail. It's about detail too, and I think we talk about metrics and numbers because that's what you can quantify, and it feels more tangible. But when I'm wanting a resume to be meatier, it's all about details. Like I just want to know what you did, and I want details and specifics so that I can truly understand what it is that you did. And I don't know if that makes sense, but it doesn't always the story doesn't always have to be told with numbers. It could be qualitative as well. That's qualitative data I feel like often gets forgotten. I feel like I have a bullet point in one of my roles that's qualitative of like, and I got feedback from these people that it was this, and there's no data point, but it's just like, this is the outcome I achieved. And so I think just being as specific and detailed as you can be is what matters.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're spot on, just, thinking about, because even myself, just putting myself back in recruiting, there were times I would look at resumes and I don't necessarily know the company you work for, know
not a clue what they do
that you're working on. And so I need that context. I mean, to be able to understand and kind of put myself in the shoes of like, oh, okay, I get where this person's coming from. Now I understand, the role, the scope of the role, like essentially to your point, what they've been able to really do and the impact that they've been able to have, because they're taking me along that journey essentially and helping me understand. So I can make a decision to say, I feel confident with scheduling a phone interview, or I feel confident with talking to the hiring manager and showing this resume because I understand, the experience that they're presenting. And so surely, the hiring manager is going to understand, and this is a good resume to look at together. So I think that's a good call out that you make about, what you were just describing here.
Yeah. And I think if you get to a point where you feel like you're ready to really level up your resume, I love when I see a theme throughout the roles of, this is what this person has accomplished multiple times over in their career. And this might be advice for people who are a little bit further along and senior in their career because they've held multiple jobs. But I had a candidate I was working with, and under every job, it was like, promoted within 4 months or promoted within 6 months, multiple times. I was like, okay, this is a person that comes in to every role she's had and she crushes it. She exceeds her goals and she's promoted internally in the organization. And that story was very clear in her resume. And I loved that because that's the story that I, as a recruiter, can go tell the hiring manager. And so if you are ready for, phase 2 of your resume overhaul, think about what story are you trying to tell and how might somebody advocate for you just by looking at your resume.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Thank you for calling that out. Really good advice.
I know we've already gone 33 minutes. I know. If you can believe it.
It's like the time is just, we're going to have to do a series.
Part 4, part 5, whatever number we're on at this point.
Keep it rolling. But I think
we'll be back for sure. We'll do more. I think we covered some high level questions that I think we both get a lot of the time. For anybody watching, if you have questions, reach out to us. I highly recommend going to Erica for career coaching. I think we all could use somebody in our corner. Now more than ever, this job market is brutal. I would say 90% of the candidates I talk to on a daily basis have been laid off and have been looking for 5-6 months or longer. And so it never hurts to have a career coach in your corner who's going to support you. I also recommend reaching out to multiple recruiters, but you have to be careful. Find the good ones that are going to actually have your back. And none of us are perfect. I've been accused of ghosting in my career. It's impossible not to have ghosted at some point as a high volume recruiter. But there are those of us who are intentionally trying not to ghost. We do try to give feedback. We do try to support you, even if you're not a fit for the jobs we're working on. We'll talk to you about your resume, give you advice. I do try to make that a part of my day. So reach out to the recruiters in your network, reach out to Erica or I. We're happy to answer questions and support you in whatever we can, even if it's just you've got this, and just to give you a sounding board. But thanks, Erica, for hopping on here spontaneously. It's been great to chat with you again.
Yeah, thanks, Sloan. I appreciate you having me.
Awesome. We'll see you everybody next time. Bye, everybody.